be with us as we gather. As we begin, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Yagara and Turrbal people. They're the ones who hold the memories and the customs and the stories of this land, and play a really important part in its ongoing stewardship and sharing that culture with those of us who have come more recently. As I said, it's a great opportunity to gather tonight. I'm connected with Dave some years ago, and he let me know he was coming to Brisbane, and said, you know, do you want me to do anything while I'm here? So it was an opportunity too good to pass up. So I'm really delighted. So Dave was, until very recently, the Director for Vision and Strategy for the Church of England, based in Church House in Westminster. He led a large team that's work was about helping dioceses and churches and networks implement the vision and strategy of the church. And anyone who's done vision and strategy work knows the importance of it being embraced through every part of an organisation, not just something that's imposed from above, and we assume that everyone will be on board. Dave served as National Director for Evangelism and Discipleship, National Advisor for Pioneer Development, but was also a tutor in pioneer mission training at Ridley Hall and Westcott House Theological Colleges. Dave speaks widely across the UK and apparently here in Brisbane as well about mission and evangelism and pioneering and strategy. And so it's terrific to have you with us this evening. Dave's going to talk with us to us for a little bit, and then there'll be a great opportunity for questions and answers after that, so we can really engage in some conversation. So Dave, we're in your hands.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Jeremy. Yeah, great to be here. Thank you, as Jeremy said, for giving up a Tuesday evening. And yeah, I was here, I think it was about 7 years ago, and I was doing a seminar. I can't even remember where it was, but Jeremy kind of came into the seminar. I think you were probably the only Anglican in that seminar, and we made contact through that, and stayed in contact mainly through Facebook. So I'm here mostly with the Uniting Church for this week, and they're speaking at their synod. But I thought, oh, great opportunity to come and spend some time with Jeremy and to talk with you. So I thought the best thing I could talk about is about what's been happening with the Church of England and this idea of creating a kind of vision and strategy, and just some of the reflections. So I'm going to talk for 20 to 30 minutes. I don't know quite how long I'm going to talk for, but I leave plenty of time for questions, and feel very happy to disagree, to ask loads of questions. I'm not expecting you to agree with everything we've done, but also to reflect on how this might help you in thinking about your own diocese and what's happening here. So, if this works, I'm going to have to move. Oh, here we are. Yeah. So, let me give you a background to the vision and strategy. Basically, the Church of England has not had a vision and strategy since 1523. Before that, in recent years, we had what they called quinquennial goals. Only the Church of England could come up with a phrase like quinquennial goals, which were 5-year kind of aspirations. So it would be things like, we want to be a growing church, we want to be, you know, that, but with no teeth with that. So back in, I think about 2019, the archbishops decided that actually what we needed to do was to have a 10-year strategy for the Church of England, but also to have some teeth to it. So it wasn't just a series of aspirations, but had something more with that. And I still don't really know how, but somehow I was asked with the Archbishop of York, as he is now, he was then the Bishop of Chelmsford, Stephen Cottrell, to kind of oversee this process. And so Stephen and I got together, and we decided some of these things are up here on the screen. So first of all, that prayer and discernment was absolutely key in this. We have been accused of lots of things in doing vision and strategy. One is that, you know, this is all just management and strategy, and actually prayer and discernment was absolutely key to this. Secondly, what we didn't want to do is produce a 30-page report for General Synod, because that would kill it. So we had, our desire was to create a vision strategy which would fit on one side of A4. Next, we didn't want it to be a kind of small group of the usual people who in a smoke-filled room decided the vision and strategy for the Church of England. So we created some large consultations, and we had hundreds of people involved in the consultation of what is it that God is calling us to do and to be in the 2020s. The one thing we decided is that we wanted to be biased to the young, so we did deliberately select younger people to be part of the consultation, including school children in some of our church schools. We wanted the widest consultation possible. Being the Church of England, we had to make sure that we ticked every possible box in terms of kind of roles, theological position, etc., etc. That this was for 10 years, so that was quite a difference to have a 10-year strategy. COVID obviously hit literally just as we started, so this isn't a process that was governed by COVID, but obviously it was impacted by COVID. But one of the good things of it was nobody had anything in their diary in March 2020. So we had to do everything online, but it did mean people were available. And lastly, ownership. So the ownership of this belongs to the bishops and the diocesan secretaries. They were ultimately the people that have the ownership and voted on it. This is it. One piece of paper. And that's what we created. So at the centre, and that's the idea, very much at the centre, is Jesus Christ centred and shaped by the 5 marks of mission. So the vision is very much, we want to be a Jesus Christ centred church. And as the Archbishop said to me, it's the least surprising vision that you could ever come up with, which is exactly right, but it does govern everything else. And shaped by the 5 marks of mission. So quite a lot of people wanted the 5 marks of mission to be the strategy. But the problem with that is that in a good strategy will change. So this is a strategy for 10 years, but it won't be the strategy forever. And we weren't really going to say the 5 marks of mission need to change after 10 years. So they provide a framework, but that's what they do. They provide a framework. So after all this consultation over 6 months, 3 simple priorities. A church that is younger and more diverse. One of the things that kind of led to this was some of my team did some research which showed 1/3 of our churches had no young people in them. 1/3 had between 1 and 5 people in them, which probably meant it was the clergy family. And 1/3 had more than 5. And I think that absolutely, and we presented that to Synod, and I think it really shocked people. The way that the clergy reacted to it was mostly to say, well, of course, we don't have any children in our parish. And I thought, oh, I'm not sure that's right. So I went to our statistics people, and they told me that there are only 4 parishes in the whole of the Church of England that have no children actually living in them. So when they said there were no children, what they meant is there were no children coming to church, but there were lots of children living there. And the whole thing of diversity, we were thinking about ethnic diversity, but also disability and social diversity. Secondly, a church where mixed ecology is the norm. It's a bit of a kind of particular church language, but by mixed ecology, we simply mean that mixture of the life of church. So traditional churches, church plants, fresh expressions, chaplaincy, schools, all those things. And that sense that we wanted this to be normative, that is the life of the church. And thirdly, a church of missionary disciples. So missionary disciples is actually a term from the Roman Catholic Church, but that sense of disciple, someone who's with Jesus, learning from him, and then missio, someone who's being sent out. You get those 2 movements in the whole of the New Testament. We're drawn to Jesus, we're sent out by Jesus. And very much with that being about the whole of life as well, not just, often what we call discipleship is really socialization into church life, and actually trying to get people beyond just thinking in that way. And then there are kind of three values around that. So simpler, humbler, and bolder. So simpler being, this is the hardest one for the Church of England, our governance and structures. Can we make them more simple? We've done a little bit of that. Humbler in the sense that recognising we're not the only church in England, that actually there are lots of other denominations that are doing great stuff. But also humbler that we don't know all the answers. But then also bolder in terms of being bolder about our witness to Jesus Christ and the role of the church to bring transformation. So we wanted to keep it really simple. And I think, as you can see, to get it on one piece of paper is what we did to do that. So that one vision, really important. The simpler bit, which I've said about, and then the three priorities. And then out of that is 6 bold outcomes, which is really what my team is working to help dioceses and churches and networks to do. So when I was thinking about this the other day, I was speaking in America, and I was trying to help the Lutheran Church think about their strategy. And one of the things I realized was they don't know who they are. So they used to be the church for people that were coming from Germany or Norway or whatever, but that's not what they are now, but they don't know quite what they are. And I realized that unless we know who we are, it's very hard to work out where we're going. And I think for us, the big thing was that we are the church for everyone. We're not the only church, obviously, in England, but that whole sense that everyone is, in one sense, part of the Church of England. And for me, I suddenly realized it was a lot of this is actually around accessibility. In the same way that we say physically we should have accessible buildings, in the same way, part of our calling as the Church of England is to make the good news of Jesus accessible to every person. And part of the vision and strategy is recognizing actually we're not doing that very well. And what do we need to do to make Jesus Christ not only the centre of the church, but accessible to every person in England, whatever their age. So that's why you get a church for everyone through doubling the number of children and young active disciples by 2030. That's the craziest outcome we have, because previous to that, we were losing 5% a year. So doubling the number is mad. The Church of England, which fully represents the communities we serve in age and diversity. So asking ourselves, what does diversity look like? It is very much saying we need to represent the communities we serve. We need to look like them, which at the moment we don't. And then 2, 3, and 4 linked together. So a parish system revitalized for mission it is really, really important. And then out of that is this idea of 10,000 new Christian communities. So what we recognize is those two are massively interlinked. So one of the great lies that has come out of this is that behind this is a desire for the bishops to get rid of the parish system. Never ever heard anyone in any authority in the Church of England suggest that ever. And actually it was exactly the opposite. We recognize the only way we're going to have new Christian communities is in revitalizing our traditional churches, because what happens is the traditional church then says, oh, actually, we're meant to be making this accessible. Oh, there's part of our parish or this that actually we're not connecting, and we might need to do something different to connect with those people. So the parish system is the powerhouse for what we're trying to do in terms of new things as well. They're not against each other, they work together. And then 5 and 6 is really all about discipleship. I think when we got to 5 and 6, we'd run out of energy and they've become very wordy outcomes. But basically, 5 is about how do we release everyone to be disciples of Jesus in the whole of their life. So how do we move from people just being attenders to being advocates? And number 6 is really about how's the local church and the diocese support that? How do they become communities and hubs for that formation? So we've got 1 vision, 3 priorities, and 6 bold outcomes. And these were the kind of the bits that we were worried about. This is our risk register, if you want one. The first is actually no one will do it. Partly because, as you know, in Anglican, our method of governance is not a top-down method of governance. Oh, that it was, but it's not. It's not about control, it is about influence. So the danger is the bishops and others basically say, we don't like this and we're not going to get involved. Secondly, about capacity. Either because of resources or busyness, actually, we haven't got the capacity to change. We're just surviving, we're just holding on, and now you want us to do all these other things. And thirdly, there isn't the kind of behaviour and cultural shifts that are needed. As it said here, the assumption can be so easily that everyone else needs to change, and we're fine. And we working backwards, saying if this is where we want to be in 2030, we've done a lot of working backwards, and these were the things that we said we need to be thinking about. So if we want 10,000 new Christian communities, we're going to need 10,000 teams to do that, not just individuals. So where are those people going to be like? How are we going to train them, etc., etc. If we're going to develop double the number of children and young people, we worked out we needed 30,000 leaders of mission with children and young people. We worked out that would mean 27,000 volunteers and 3,000 new paid workers. Now, when we first did that, I thought 27,000 volunteers, that's bananas. We're never going to get to that. But then I realized we've got 14,000 churches. So we're talking about 2 per church over 10 years. Surely that is possible. And the 3,000 is actually more difficult because all our pathways for training youth and children's workers had collapsed for various reasons. So we had no pathways for that. So we've had to actually start completely new curriculums and syllabuses for training children youth workers, both through our theological colleges and our diocese, to get to the 3,000. We realized also for doubling that number, we needed to have 3,000 churches that had what we decided a kind of number of children and young people that became a really sustainable hub was 25, we worked out. And so we said we've got nearly 1,000 of those churches in the Church of England at the moment. It went down a bit during COVID, which means we're going to need to find 2,000 more. We reckon 1,000 of those would be those that were in the kind of 12 to 24, that how do we help them get to 25 plus, and then we might need to start new things to enable that to happen. So what do we need to do about that? The whole thing around discipleship, which I think we're still struggling with a bit, but what does that look like? What does that mean for us in helping dioceses particularly to think about how they create pathways for discipleship? And we're beginning to see some of that in diocese. And then the national funding has been absolutely critical in this. So we have said that to receive national funding, dioceses need to be creating strategy which is in line with the vision and strategy. And particularly there are 2 areas. One is children and young people, and one is areas of economic deprivation, because those have been the 2 biggest areas in which we've underinvested as a Church of England. So we wanted particularly to do something about those. So the church commissioners, who control all our money, have given extra money to enable this to happen across the Church of England. And the realignment is that we now have various ways of funding. I won't go through all these, but the biggest thing I've seen in the Church of England in my 30 years of being ordained, 34 years, is an alignment behind the vision and strategy of funding, people, intentions and priorities, and research. I've never seen that lining up before. And as you see, funding diocese, the people and partnership funding is really key, and that's funding other organisations. So we suddenly realised that before we put all our funding into diocese, but most local churches do not look to their diocese for training. They look to other organisations and networks. And so we have been supporting and funding some of the key organisations to help us develop around some of those criteria. So, for instance, there's an organisation called Youthscape, which had produced some really good training for clergy who didn't have a youth group to start a youth group. And they'd done it in 3 dioceses and it had been brilliant. And we said, could you do it in some more dioceses? They said, we've got no money to do that. And so we said, we'll give you the money to do that. And they're now working in 13 dioceses. We're giving them some more money. They'll work in another 10 dioceses beyond that. And then ministry funding, both for lay ministry and ordained ministry. But it's that alignment, I think, which has been a massive change. So the Archbishop's Council, which is the kind of main board of the Church of England, has said that its priorities are the priorities of the Church of England. And even more so, which has been a game changer, that the outcome of doubling the number of children and young people is their priority of priorities. And it means that every paper that comes to the Archbishop's Council has to have on it as part of the paper, how does this relate to the outcome of doubling the number of children and young people? And that has been a massive, massive change. So that alignment has been just been key. And it's worth saying that this is national. Again, one of the criticisms has been saying, oh, this is just giving money to a particular tradition in the Church of England. Again, not true. And in fact, a quarter of England's population lives in parishes supported by national funding. So this is truly national, what's going on. Secondly, this is working. So places that have been funded nationally have more people attending them, have more giving, and most importantly for dioceses, pay more parish share, actually. Last year, we wanted to find out, if we're looking for 10,000 new worshipping communities, we wanted to know what was happening on the ground. We asked parishes, had they started something new in 2023? And we were shocked to discover that 1,328 parishes had started a new worshipping community, which is about 9% of all parishes. When I've talked to bishops and said, you know, how has this happened? What have you done? They've all said, I have no idea. And I think there is that real, missional energy in parishes where people are saying, we're not accessible for everyone. We need to be doing some different things, again, across the traditions. That has led to this. And then lastly, again, our media has just begun to pick up on this, but for the last 4 years, church attendance, both for adults and children and young people, has grown in the Church of England. We've only kept records, amazingly, since 1960 of attendance, and that hasn't happened at any point since 1960. Now, some of this, and the critics particularly will say this, is because of COVID bounce back. That definitely is true, but that doesn't last for 4 years. People don't take 4 years to come back to church. So that has been quite amazing. And who knows, cause and effect, whether that is related to vision and strategy or not. We can't prove that, but that is what's happening. And lastly, this is about people. This is personal. So this is just from funded projects, because that's where we have the information. We've seen 41,000 new individuals join the church and 20,000 young people. So, and I think it's really important that actually this is about those people. Some people say to us all the time, numbers don't matter, and you're just kind of management focused. But actually numbers do matter. The big number that matters is number one, actually, that there are 41,000 individuals who've now joined the church through these funded projects and whose lives are being transformed through Jesus Christ, but also they are transforming their communities as well through that. The other big learning is that leadership is absolutely key. So some of the evaluations we've done of funded projects show that well-supported, effective leadership is absolutely key. Team working and prayerful discernment and clear focus. But this effective leadership is really important, both in terms of the local church and diocese. One of the interesting bits we discovered was that when it came to the child weekly attendance, there was a massive variation between dioceses. Some dioceses had grown by 20 or 30%. Some dioceses had shrunk by 50%. And when we looked at the reasons, the main reason for that was diocesan leadership, was the culture that had been created by the diocesan leadership was the main factor. So I think the big learning for us is that leadership is really key in all this. I've gone through most of those about the reach, but the last is that it takes time to show the impact. So again, one of the classic criticisms we've had is that, oh, it's not making much difference. We're spending lots and lots of money. And actually, it takes longer than you think to show the impact. So now we understand it's that 41,000, 20,000 children, but that has taken 3 or 4 years to get to that point. It doesn't just happen overnight. I think that's one of our big learnings from this. I'll point it at the top. So I'm finishing off with this. Our key learnings are at the centre of this is prayer and discernment. One of the criticisms I've heard recently is we should stop this management stuff and actually pray. And it really annoys me that that was said, because it gives the impression that we've not done any praying yet. And at the centre of this was praying and discernment, saying, where is God in the 2020s? Clear identity, that's what I said. Who are we as Anglicans? A vision rather than a burning platform. One of the dangers, I think, classically, is you go to these seminars and they show you the decline of the Church of England or whatever denomination, and by 2070 you'll no longer exist. Not sure that's really very inspirational. Whereas I think a vision, this is what the future could look like. You know, decline is not inevitable, is much more helpful, I think, for people. Building trust. So who owns this around the bishops and stuff? Prioritizing, again, absolutely key. Only having 3 priorities is really, really important. I did some work a few years ago with the Uniting Church in Adelaide, and they were wanting to develop a strategy. And they told me they had 26 priorities. I told them they didn't have any priorities. They just had a long list of wishes. And it's that focus and intention that I think is really, really key. So one of my sayings is we're clear at the core and we're messy at the edges. So we're clear at the core, these 3 priorities, we're sticking with them for 10 years. Lots of people are saying, we should add this, we should do this. And we're saying, no, that God has called us for these 10 years to have these as our priority. But the way that's interpreted at a local level will look different. So it's clear, we're clear at the core, messy at the edges. Stakeholders, we just find we need to keep repeating structures which reinforce, already said about the Archbishop's Council. Alignment, I've already said. Money, I've said. Leadership, I've said. Feedback loops, really, really important. Stories and research. So what are the stories we're learning? How do we share with them? And what research are we doing? You've seen some of that research where we can say, this is what's happening. It is really important, the feedback loops. Partnership, who we're working with, accountability. And I think lastly, the big change is we've moved from activities to strategy. So in the past, what dioceses have looked for funding is projects. So, and I've even had bishops ring me up saying, I've got money to spend, what could I do with it? And trying to move much more to what's the strategy for the diocese, and then how might projects fit into that, but starting with strategy and recognizing ultimately that we don't control it. Once you give out a strategy, it's not in your control. We won't worry about that too much. Okay, we'll finish. That was a very quick run through.
Well, thanks, Dave.
and remembering that England is not Australia, we're a
Yeah.
different space here, but I think, you know, there's some key learnings that we might take away. But I guess as we begin thinking about questions and some conversation, I just wanted to ask, first of all, you said that, you know, that uptick in attendances, you don't know cause and effect, but
Yeah.
what's your hunch in terms of what's driving some of that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it is partly about the vision and strategy, because I think it's making the churches be more intentional about what they're doing. So I do think it has a factor in that, but I also think there are some cultural factors that are driving this as well. So we're seeing, you may have seen it's been reported over here, particularly a massive rise in spiritual interest amongst Generation Z, which I think comes from COVID, and I've done some research on this. Every time there's been a major pandemic, there's been a religious revival, because it does ask existential questions. So for me, Jeremy, it probably is that mixture of us being aligned and intentional, but there are bigger changes where God's at work, and I suspect, but it's only a hunch, it's those things together that are working. The Archbishop of York is always so good on analogy. He says it's like playing golf and you're putting, but suddenly the hole has become bigger. It's a really good analogy of what God seems to be doing.
So, opportunity for questions and conversation. Jeff.
What were the issues in diocesan leadership that were against growth, and what changed?
I don't think there was much against growth.
I think you said something in diocesan leadership culture had to shift to make this possible.
Yes.
What had to shift?
Yeah. So I don't think there were dioceses that were against growth. I think what shifted is the realization to be more strategic is a big shift. So planning, thinking, praying, really big shift for a lot of dioceses. And again, not just being activities focused, so that kind of we'll do this, we'll do this, we'll do this, but actually thinking big in that. What's our strategy for the next 10 years? And then where does funding come into that? Secondly, so for instance, we did some work with all the dioceses around children and young people when we began this. Every diocese said, we think this is absolutely key. And every diocese said, we don't know what to do. So, and what we've done over the last 4 or 5 years through those feedback loops is we do know now some of the things that work, and dioceses are learning from that and putting those things into place. And again, and then I think the alignment of people resources alongside that strategy has probably been the third part of that for dioceses that works really well. And the stakeholder thing I think is vital. So I have been meeting with my colleague, with a bishop every week, to talk with them about vision and strategy, just to help them, well, to hear from them mainly, but also to help them continually think about what does this look like in my place, because it's going to look different. We're very aware of that. It's not going to look the same in every place. So I think those are some of the key factors which have led to change, really.
John?
Yeah, thanks ever so much. It's really fascinating. You had like a slide where you talked about funding.
Yes.
I'm just really interested, kind of how much. Equally, if you're thinking about, let's say, imagine you could implement this here, how much would it mean here?
Yeah, I
Are
mean,
we talking, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, or tens of millions?
yeah, I couldn't comment here. And as Jeremy said, England is very different from here. So you've got to do all that hard work. But I can tell you the amounts, they are large. So we're talking about over 10 years, £670 million.
Wow.
We could sell changing.
That would produce silence, yeah.
And your belief is that we need that kind. You need that kind of size to have that kind of.
Yes, I think so. The church commissioners have said there's no point us being the richest church in the country if no one's coming to us, and we recognise we really, because they're obviously always balancing giving more, but thinking about the future, and they're like, no, so they've given extra towards this. There is a danger with that because the answer isn't money. So there's always that danger. And there's also, we've built in quite a lot of accountability about that money, which dioceses complain about quite often and say there's too much, red tape, etc. But I think there is a rightness about the accountability around that. And as I said, we're also, most of the money goes to diocese because we believe dioceses know how to spend it. So what we don't do is just give it to individual churches, because nationally we've got no idea. Diocese, it should be the place where they know what's happening. As I said, it's that change from saying, okay, you've got a 9-year strategy. What do you need the money? How can we help you in developing that? Where is that money? And as I said, we've also said the particular things that will help with that are your work around children, young people, and areas of economic deprivation. Now, included in that would be money around net zero, racial justice as well, included in that money. So it's not just for mission in the narrower sense. It's also mission in the wider extent. But yeah, it's serious money because we believe it needs that kind of investment. As I said, it's recognizing that we've underinvested in certain areas, and we're trying to rebalance what's been happening, really. But there is, as I said, I think, I'm very honest, there is a danger of that, thinking, oh, this will all work because we've got loads of money, which isn't the truth, but it does help.
Thanks. It was a really interesting presentation. I was curious to hear you say it was really hard to start new curricula and training for youth, children and family workers. What did you learn, and what insights could you share with us in terms of making that sort of investment?
Yeah, so
it was a bit of a tabula rasa.
Yeah. So I'll give you an example. So the college I used to be working for, I went to talk to them about we're looking for 3,000 workers over 10 years. What could you do? And they came back to me and said, we could do this degree program, and over the 10 years we could train 30 people. And I'm like, did you not hear anything I've just said? They're now training 300 people. But they're doing it, a lot of it online. They're doing it with people already doing children and youth work. They're doing it, initially it's a year thing, and then people can develop that. So that, I think, is the change, to get them away from just thinking about degrees. I have nothing, degrees are great, but I'm not totally convinced that all children and youth workers need that. And then we're looking at different levels of training within that. Sorry, you're going to come back.
Yeah, so the thing you talked about was curricula and then the training.
Yeah.
So what was it that was just, so you've just given us a tip on that. It's to do with people who perhaps are not needing a degree.
Yes.
So did you go and buy a curricula from somewhere, or did
No.
what were
the colleges have developed their own curricula. But a much simpler curricula around developing children's and youth work specifically. And obviously that includes things like safeguarding and all those other really important things as part of that. But trying to do it in a more practical way, I think. And also thinking about, the danger classically in theological education is you give all the education at the beginning and then send the people off. So trying to do a year to start with, but then various other training that goes alongside that over the next 2 or 3 years. Yeah.
Michael, did you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. No, thanks so much. I was just wondering, was there any intersection with the Resource Church project with this at all? Did they get extra funding, or what part did they play?
So we've done most of the funding of the Resource Churches.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So absolutely, as being part of that. But that's changed, I think, as well. So initially, so these are the big church plants, often with large teams of 100 starting them off or whatever. And those began initially in the kind of classic city centre student places. But actually, what we've seen over the last 3 or 4 years is a number of those operating now in areas of social deprivation. So that is a huge change that's taking place. And it's worth saying that though we use the phrase sometimes resource church, I think we're using more now the phrase resourcing church. So the idea of these churches is they're not just to get bigger and bigger, but they continually send out teams to start new things or particularly graft into churches that are struggling. So no, we're supplying, but that's again up to diocese. So that's not a central decision. It's diocese that say we want this kind of church, and then we would be funding them.
Partly piggybacking on Bronwyn's question, where we took, I think he used the language of the pathways for youth and children's ministry had collapsed. Was there a similar observation around lay ministry pathways at all? I'm just wondering what that looked like in the lay ministry playing into this, and perhaps in the bigger picture, connecting into the significance of leaders and their role in this, lay and ordained.
So no, I mean lay leadership has been probably really key for the last 10 years in the Church of England. But what's happened actually just in the last year is that nationally we've now got involved in that, whereas before the decision was that ordination training was a national thing and lay training was a local thing. Now, though it's still diocesan, a lot more work at a national level around lay training and investment from some of this money as well into lay training. So I've just got a bid in for 1,700 sports workers, which will be part of a lay training thing to upskill lay people to develop sports ministry. So lay is absolutely key, and we recognise, with the 30,000, the vast majority of those are going to be lay people. In terms of starting new things, most of those are going to be lay people. So absolutely crucial. So, for instance, Ridley, where the college I was involved in, now have as many lay people in the college as they do ordinands. Whereas when I was there was literally a smattering of lay people, and it was all ordinands. So really beginning to see some of those big changes around lay leadership.
Oh yeah, Dave, I think it's really good to have that strategy, that overall strategy of developing children's ministry. And that, if you have that strategy, it helps everybody in the church to focus on that. I mean, I work with children's ministry here in Australia, and when you're working in an older church community, it can be quite difficult because part of children growing in the church is to expose them to liturgy, get them to read a lesson. And what often happens when you do that is there's grumblings, even though the words are up on the screen, there's grumblings, oh, they didn't pronounce it very well, they didn't articulate it very well. So I think if you have that overall strategy, then people start to realize, wow, we need to all work together on this.
No, absolutely. I think that's the advantage of having those priorities, that people know this is absolutely key for the future of the Church of England, well, and for the present as well. So
Stop grumping, and
there'll always be some grumping, but that does really help.
So just following on from that, you talked about the shifts that need to happen at diocesan level. Are they mirrored by the shifts that need to happen at parish level? And then supplementary, are different things happening in different parts of the tradition? That breadth of Anglicanism, where it's happening better or differently. What does that look like across the Church of England?
In terms of the tradition, we're really working hard at that. For instance, we've been working really hard with the Catholic. There's a kind of Catholic group, Catholic mission group. So we've been working really hard with them on their plans, and particularly around children and youth, which they've not always been great at, but they've got some really good plans, and we're helping them develop those plans and that kind of thing. One of the networks that we're working with now is a network. I don't know if they may have even been over here, called Leading Your Church into Growth. I know they've done some stuff in Australia recently, but part of the reason for working with them is they seem to have the ability in terms of mission to work right across the traditions. They don't. The people in their teams and stuff are from, and they just seem to be accepted by everyone. So we've invested recently, I think, nearly £1 million in helping them to develop what they're already doing across the church. Yeah, we're really trying to do that as much as possible, because one of the, again, criticisms is this is a part of an evangelical takeover, which isn't true at all. I think part of the problem is that the evangelicals are much better organised and networked. So part of our role has been helping to develop networks in other parts of the vision. What's the first part you were asking?
Just that similar, you talked about the shift that's required at a
yes,
diocese
is it happening
level,
at parish level?
and, you know, it seems to me that a lot of those shifts also need to happen
Yeah.
at this level.
Yeah.
And you're seeing that happen.
Yes, and I think what the research was saying is that if it's happening at the diocesan level, it's much more likely to happen at the parish level. That's the interesting bit. So if the diocese creates that culture of strategy, then actually it really does happen at the local level, and that's been a really good learning for us, I think. That those two are so closely related, and it explains, as I said, some of the weird anomalies in terms of children and young people and the difference between dioceses.
Yes, thank you very much for your sharing. At the grassroots level, I'm wondering if you could tell us two stories, one from a rural setting and one from an urban, big metropolitan sort of sense of how it's worked. You talked about 41,000, you talked about 12,000.
Yeah.
What about what's actually happened? Two stories.
Yeah. Okay. I'll tell you two stories from the same diocese. So Edmondsbury and Ipswich diocese, which is in kind of East Anglia, was when my friend took over as bishop, known as the basket case of the Church of England, and was shedding people in a massive way. They came in for some national funding, two projects. So one is called Lightwave, which is about rural mission, and it's the creation of kind of small group communities in rural areas, and has been amazingly successful in developing church in that way across, that area of Suffolk has, I think there's about 400 churches. It's crazy for a tiny population. And so with the Archdeacon who's overseen it, who's got vast experience of this, they've developed these smaller communities in rural areas alongside the parish church, and that's been amazingly successful. And then secondly, in terms of urban, and this is often what happens, they recognise that Ipswich, which is the kind of capital of Suffolk and has the biggest population, was in terms of proportion of people that goes to church was really low. So when we look at statistics, we look at just kind of basic attendance figures, but actually the one that we're really interested in is proportion of people who go to church, and Anglican church as well, obviously in that. And Ipswich was very low. So that accessibility question, people were not accessing it. And so we put money in, again, another archdeacon is overseeing this, to develop, I think it's about 3 resource churches, but also revitalise some other parishes in the city of Ipswich. And again, that's worked really well, actually. Yeah, some real revitalisation of churches, increase in numbers, etc., and getting churches working together across traditions and with other denominations as well. So yeah, there's 2 in just one diocese.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've recently started volunteering with an organisation because I was impressed with their work in the community. And they said, anybody want to be a volunteer? And when they get a volunteer, they actually start work straight away on doing things. There's almost zero training. You want to do that? Here's 5 minutes on a computer, or you're going to work with that person, or you're going to walk with that person, and you just start doing it. And and it's now, and in a short period of time, hundreds of people, mainly young people. I go along because it's good to be with young people, and they just have done an enormous change on not worrying about training people. Just here's what we want to do. And I've had the experience of years of training, and all through the church and many programs, and helped run summer schools to train people. But I'm in a whole new world of you just do it. And I'm just wondering if you've got so many reflections on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think our reflections are people don't need long, big amounts of training to get going. I think that is absolutely key. And we are classically, our training methods are to give you all the information at the beginning. And even though you may not need half that information, we're going to give you all this stuff. And much more to have a lower bar of information initially, but more ongoing training. I'd be worried about no training with children and youth ministry. So I think there are some areas, like safe, etc., where you do need, you do need training. But for a lot of things, no, I think I agree. I think you kind of get going. I remember when we were planting this church in Huddersfield, the north of England, and we had 2 or 3 people that actually obviously were gifted in preaching, but they were meant to do a 3-year course with the diocese before officially they could preach, and they were like, I haven't got 3 years to do this. So we weren't meant to do this, but we kind of did the training on the job. So the best way to do it was to get them to preach, then get them together to talk about how the preaching had gone. That for me was the best training that we could do. So yeah, I think there is a place for training, but it has to be alongside doing it. I think that the 2 go together, and we're seeing more of that in our ordinand training now as well. Much more, less college based and more alongside placements and working in churches.
Dave, I'll get Denise to. Sorry, did you have a question? I'll get Denise to thank you properly in a moment. But one last question from me, and that is, and I know it's your job to be confident and hopeful.
Yeah.
But what's your level of confidence in terms of it all happening and
Yes.
hitting those numbers and
Yeah.
that sort of level of achieving what you set out to achieve?
Yeah. I mean, it's the classic thing is that I don't know. I mean, I am naturally hopeful and positive, and I have been surprised at what has happened so far. But I'm aware that may not continue. I think also there is a shadow for us of the sexuality debate, if I'm honest, as well, and that because of all our that's kind of been put a little bit on the back shelf, but that could cause massive disruptions across the Church of England, which could impact this as well. So I am aware that there are real dangers of this, but it feels like to me that we've got momentum that has developed, and that's I think where my confidence comes from. I think 2 things. One is that prayerful and discernment, and the second is that those priorities were not new. So that, like the Church of Missionary Disciples, we'd had before that a massive report to the Church of England called Setting God's People Free, which is all about whole life discipleship. So it feels like the things we're doing are not, oh, we just pulled these things out the air. They're actually what God was already doing, and we've just given them a bit more focus and intention. So, but ultimately, yeah, we're not in control of this. So time will tell.
Yeah.
Dave, thank you so much for making time in what is obviously a busy schedule to come and speak to us and share some of the wisdom of the last few years. I picked up there were 3 really key parts of what's been happening in the UK. We have to set the finance one aside. The general manager's sitting over there. I'm sure we can leave that one with him.
Uniting Church have said similar
They've
things.
said similar
Funny
things.
enough.
Well, the other one was relationships. Without good relationships at every level of our communities, not only our church communities, we can't hope to continue to grow and spread the good news. And of course, spirituality, prayer and discernment. I was fortunate to visit the Diocese of Lincoln a couple of years ago and sit with their strategic development team.
Oh, yeah.
And I was really, really impressed that part of their team was a spirituality warden. And it was that it was a senior clergy person. It was their job to keep questioning every time another strategy was being put in place. Where is God in this? What is God saying to us? Where are we being led? And certainly, aside from the money, I think that there are lessons that we can certainly pick up here.
Brilliant.
And a very small gift for you,
Thank you.
but it's a conversation starter. It's a relationship builder. It's an encourager to develop spirituality across our communities. So with our very grateful thanks and our blessings, please accept that
Thank you.
very
That's
small
lovely.
gift.
Oh, thank you very much.
So thanks, Dave. Thanks to all of you for coming out on a Tuesday night. It's been a really good conversation, and I hope it's spurred some things in your thinking. Dave's really easy to find online, and some of the articles and things he's written are really accessible and easy to find. So I encourage you to get on the Google and find some of that stuff.
Happy for that, the PowerPoint to go out wider as well. So feel free to use that.
Terrific. And we can probably send that to anyone who's registered.